There are certain landmark dates when it comes to LGBTQ equality in the U.S. Among them, the Stonewall riots, the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the legalization of same-sex marriages, and yesterday, the Supreme Court declaring yesterday that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which bars discrimination based on sex, also protects gay, lesbian, and transgender workers. At the center of the case, the claim of Amy Stevens, a transgender woman who was fired from her job at a funeral parlor once she began to transition. Stevens, she died last month. Her widow posting a simple message after the decision was announced: "We won." Also of note, the vote itself, 6-3, with Trump appointee Neil Gorsuch siding with the liberal justices and writing the opinion. Chief Justice John Roberts, he also sided with the majority. The decision yesterday followed an angry weekend for LGBTQ advocates. That after the Trump administration took a step against transgender rights just this past Friday. The administration putting forward a new rule allowing doctors and hospitals to refuse to treat transgender Americans if they think doing so would violate their personal religious beliefs. That rule wasn't just during Pride Month, but it came on the 4-year anniversary of the Pulse nightclub massacre as well. That, plus the continued murders of black transgender women, prompting rallies in Brooklyn and Los Angeles this weekend to protect black trans lives. So, what does the court ruling mean for the future of gay, lesbian, and transgender Americans? And what more needs to be done in the quest for equality? For that, and to discuss police reforms, we turn to Jim McGreevey. McGreevey was the 52nd governor of New Jersey, resigning in 2004, the very same day he declared he was a gay American. Governor, it's always good talking to you. There's a lot to get into. Let's first start off with the High Court yesterday. Walk me through the range of emotions, because to some it was a surprise, not just that, you know, how they ruled, but that it was 6-3, who delivered the majority opinion. And in a landmark case, what does it say for the LGBTQ community in terms of equality, or the gains at least, in America?
Yeah, I mean, Rich, you just hit all the high marks in the sense that you had a Trump appointment, Neil Gorsuch, who's, despite what individuals may think, he's a textualist. He understands the importance of language. And in a groundbreaking 6-3 decision, with he and Justice Breyer and as well as the left of the court understand significantly that LGBTQ individuals cannot be discriminated at the workplace. So I think, as you saw in commentary after commentary, that this was almost as significant, in certain areas, actually perhaps even of greater significance than the marriage decision, insofar that it almost significantly, if not permanently, settles the enshrinement of LGBTQ rights within the fabric of American constitutional law. What you saw was the left of the court allowing what would have been perceived as a traditional Trump appointee writing the decision with the support of two clearly more moderate individuals. And so a 6-3 decision, I think, speaks loudly and clearly to the nation and puts the court in the mainstream. And I would argue that this is despite the Trump administration's efforts. I mean, we need to understand, while Gorsuch was clearly a brilliant jurist and appointed, albeit a conservative one, and appointed by the Trump administration, I think it's important to note that the Trump administration was on the other side of the argument. They were opposing the decision that the Supreme Court made in this landmark decision.
And even within the same news cycle, the Trump administration came forward to try and make it allowable for hospitals to refuse medical care to people in the same population if they had religious objections to it. So I thought it was jarring what the Supreme Court said versus what the administration did. But, you know, things sometimes in this country, in many cases, we'll talk about one in a minute, take far too long to get right. The velocity of this issue, think back from yourself, from, when you left the governorship to where we are now. And yes, it's over years, but when you look at the prism of American history, how much has changed so fast in terms of a willingness finally to have fairness?
And I think that's important, Rich. I think what you just said is not only on behalf of the legislature, but for me, it was President Obama, it was Vice President Biden, who embraced this change, as well as Congress, but particularly the courts and Justice Kennedy's decision. So you see that different branches of government move at different paces depending on the popularity, but the court has always been enshrined with the responsibility of interpreting the Constitution. In the Gorsuch decision, reflecting upon the civil rights legislation and reflecting upon sex, and in this particular case, clearly saw the wrongness of discrimination based upon sexual orientation, and the fact that it depended upon who would have loved that same type of individual to have permitted that discrimination was in fact invidious, was in fact violative of the Constitution. So I think you're right. In many cases, I think the American public was far ahead of the political class. And then once the LGBTQ community people understood it was their brothers, it was their sisters, it was their fathers, it was their nephews or nieces. I mean, people came to the understanding that being gay was as natural as being straight. And there was the recognition that human rights in the full array of what we understood as constitutional rights in this nation came about. And also, like, the ho-hum, the reality that the sky isn't falling in, this isn't the end of the world, this isn't the apocalypse, people are going to go to work, and unfortunately, two of the plaintiffs had been deceased, but just realizing that in the course of their professional lives, they were fired for no other reason but their sexual orientation. And that was so onerous, that was so wrong, and that by virtue of this decision, it will stop, and it sends a clear message across this country.
Let's get to the other issue as it relates with discrimination in America, taking a look in the mirror in terms of where we are. Obviously, in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, I want to ask you about this because you've worn a lot of different hats and you have an interesting perspective on this. Obviously, as a former governor, but you spent a lot of your post-gubernatorial life in the reintegration program of people coming back in communities. Now you're also dealing with also concerns of the inmate population. Should you look to Camden and what they did? I mean, it seems that we've had such polar ideas. I mean, I look what's happening in Seattle and it's crazy. But then I also look at people on the flip side saying that there's nothing to see here, as just like missing the obvious moment in America. Where is the sweet spot where we can better use resources, give people an idea that justice is, if not blind, a lot closer than we are to it right now? How would you think the right way to approach this and navigate it is?
I think your allusion to Camden is a great point, because Camden had basically a dysfunctional police department, and the police department was abolished and reconfigured. And when President Obama recognized the Camden Police Department, he understood that the importance of community policing, the importance of being involved in the community, the importance of training, sufficient training, understanding the appropriate use and limited use of force only as a last resort. The great thing about Camden, or the great thing about Newark, is that understanding that policing has to be integral to the life of the community. And that means that the police are not an occupying power. The police are not merely for the function of quote unquote law and order as some individuals would understand it. That police are part of the fabric of the community. They're the individuals that respond to emergency. They're individuals that hopefully in a far different understanding of policing are part of the community. The question is, all right, how do we go from here? And so I think it's when we start looking at the necessity for accreditation of police organizations, we start talking about benchmarks of professionalism. I think on all of these areas that we are going to have to move as a community, as a nation.
Governor, it's always great talking to you. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Rich.
Up next, COVID. We're not talking about it as much these days, but the virus, it is not going away. The numbers, they have a lot of officials concerned that scenes like these, overrun hospitals and overworked responders, could return and return soon. We've got the latest, and we'll also speak with an expert from Harvard next.